Welcome to Paradigm Shifting. Let's have some fun. Okay, I have been working at this concept for a good part of my adult life. Didn't have the language to talk about it, but I've learned a whole lot about it in my studies, both as a behavior teacher in elementary school and as a private individual doing personal research. It is really important to understand how your mind works if you're going to use it to the best advantage you can. And hopefully we're going to do some exploration in that topic, and you might find some of the concepts useful in your own personal journey, as I have found in mine. I started out just talking, and I found that it was not working out so well. So what I'm going to do is I'm writing a blog about this, paradigmshifting.com, and I am going to read some of the stuff I've written and talk about it, because I find that is a useful kind of way of approaching the topic in a manner that it can embellish upon the written part, because I find that in my personal journey, I've spent a lot of time on the internet, both reading script content in written form and watching videos. I find that both have their advantages, and so I am going to attempt to integrate the two together in a hopefully meaningful way, so that you can benefit from both aspects of that kind of instruction. One of the things I learned as a teacher in pedagogy was that actually this was more neuro-linguistic program, because I got a master practitioner in that in the 1990s, because I found it a useful way of looking at how the mind operates. It was based on expert performance modeling on two individuals who were extremely good at affecting change in people's lives. One was a medical doctor and a psychiatrist named Milton Erickson, and the other was a researcher and therapist, Virginia Satir, who founded the School of Family Systems. It looks at the dynamics in the family in order to help people shift. They do use very different types of techniques for that. The family systems aspect was more of a cognitive approach, and the Milton Erickson used hypnotherapy. So he became a master of artfully vague language and hypnosis in order to help people to fix whatever problems they were having, so that they could become more whole as a human being and be able to meet their needs better in society. And if you are a functioning society member, you're going to be contributing more than if you don't. So I find these things both very useful. So let's take a look at thinking outside the box, because that is kind of one of the paradigms I like to play with. What is thinking outside the box? It's a paradigm of how to look at the world through a dichotomous lens of inside and outside. Well, what does that mean? What is thinking outside the box? Well, first we have to look at what is the box. That is a metaphor for working within a singular paradigm. And that's what people generally do. And thinking outside the box is operating in a different paradigm than most people you interact with are using. I am a Canadian, and we live in a very conformist society here. And it's not good or bad. Those are value judgments. What it means, though, is that most people have tacitly agreed to look at the world in a similar way. And that works very well if you have a society that is functioning. The downside, of course, there is always a downside, is it is possible to co-opt a society like that and flip the script for a large number of people at the same time. Now, we've seen this play out through both the COVID-19 pandemic, so-called, and the climate change paradigm, both of which are based on emotional responses, and the narrative is divisive and designed to bring up fear in the individual. Why would anybody want to do that? Well, let's take a look at pre-World War II Germany. There was a society of the most liberal, open society in Europe at the time. So, what's wrong with that? Well, very conformist thinking, because everybody was working out of the same paradigm, at least the vast majority were. And when you create fear in a population that has very conformist thinking, you can take that and use it to your advantage. Let's compare Canada and the United States and what happened during the COVID pandemic. Well, in the United States, if you look at their paradigm, the rugged individualist, the iconoclastic thinker, the good old boys who don't trust government, that is a strong paradigm in the United States. Canada, however, because of our history, we've never had internal conflicts that tore our country apart like the United States did during the Civil War they had. There's a lot of debate on what that war was actually about, which is kind of interesting, and a lot of that's coming out even today. So, if you look at how Canada responded to the pandemic, where information was shut down, the narrative was controlled, the population was isolated, and they were driven to a frenzy of fear through PCR testing and mask wearing and social distancing, none of which was in any pandemic plan of any country previous to the rollout of this pandemic. So, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too deep just yet. However, if you look at the Canadian response, about 85% of the people bought into it and went along and took one for the team to save grandma and to, stop the spread. Isn't it funny that the flu virus disappeared almost completely in the winter of 2021? Odd. Now, if you look at how the United States responded, they were all over the map because the states, individual states, are a lot less uniform in their approach to anything, pretty much. There's a lot of variation, and each state responded a little differently. Some a lot more conformist and controlling, some a lot more free and open. I mean, they all bought into it to a degree because that was the message being pumped 24/7 on as many channels as they could buy. So the U.S. response, they got about 70% of the people to buy into it and accept the untested, untried platform with no safety data. I mean, yeah, that whole COVID thing was a disease so lethal you had to be tested to know you had it. And a cure so safe you had to force people to take it. Anyway, that's another topic for conversation at another time. But if we look at what was the box there? Inside the box was the message being pumped out by the health organizations, the WHO and the World Health Organization, Health Canada. Every province in British Columbia has their own health officer swearing by the need to poke everyone with this untested drug. And when the evidence started rolling out that there were problems with it, the response was to shut down the conversation, to demonize the people questioning it, and to attack criminally. Now, the hallmark of science is open and honest discussion and sharing information and replicatability of results, none of which was permissible during this, because if you don't control the narrative, then people might start asking questions. And I think the aim was to get everyone jabbed. That's what their message was anyway. So that was thinking inside the box. So outside the box is looking at a different paradigm. Now, the latest kind of controversy, I guess it's not that recent, but it's become more prevalent, is the germ theory versus terrain theory. Two different paradigms of how to look at the world and how to deal with health, which is basically the paradigm that we're operating under both those theories. Now, one of the things I learned in NLP was chunking, which is you go from very specific to very broad and general. Now, the more broad and general you are, the bigger the chunk is. So what they taught us in NLP was to chunk up until you get agreement and only get specific as quickly as you can maintain that agreement. And sometimes you need to stop at a fairly high level of abstraction because people stop being able to agree on things when the information is unassailable, such as we had in COVID. When you have an unassailable narrative, you don't have science, you have dogma. Because if you have 5 scientists in the room, you're going to end up with 6 theories of how things operate, or maybe more. There is no all scientists agree on anything ever. Look back in history. You'll never find it. There's always people with their pet theories, and their theories are different, and they are fundamentally underpinned by different assumptions. Because really, a theory is based on a series of assumptions that have to be valid in order for the theory to actually have any validity. The hallmark of science is replicatability. And to be able to explain the why it works. Because if you have an effect and you can't understand the why, then you don't have a valid theory of mechanism. And if you look at our COVID thing, the mechanism of the disease, so-called, the spike protein, they used the most lethal part of the disease in the mRNA injection, surrounded by a lipid nanoparticle, which in itself is toxic. mRNA is impossible to use for anything within the human body unless you protect it from the immune system. You know, the very fundamental idea of the immune system and being able to manipulate it using chemicals is in itself a paradigm that the whole medical model, allopathy in the Western world, is based on. Anyway, I'm getting into the weeds here, and we can approach some of these ideas perhaps in a little more detail in another talk. But right now, what I'm focused on is thinking about thinking. That's called metacognition. So if you think about it, if you're inside the box, you're responding predictably to known programs. Now, you cannot not run programs. That's how your brain operates. Programs are fundamentally patterns in our brain. And we have patterns for everything. Just think when you get up in the morning. You got a pattern for when you get up, why you get up, what you do in sequence when you get up. And all this becomes a routine. Routines are patterns. And you would have a hard time living your life without them because everything would be a cognitive activity. Now, I've taught children who everything was a cognitive activity, and it is painfully slow to do anything because you have to think about why you're doing everything and how to do it. Like your brain's busy. Your unconscious mind, which doesn't really exist, but it's a way of thinking about our mind in a dichotomous way. And humans seem to enjoy the pattern of thinking in dichotomies. In, out, up, down, you, me, right, wrong. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with routines. Routines are important. You have to run routines in your life if you're going to function. The question is, who sets the pattern and why? And is it the most effective pattern you could be running? Is there a better pattern? Are you even interested in exploring that? Because really, the population operates on a bell curve, right? It looks like a bell, like that, right? You get in number of people on the bottom, and you got intelligence on the side. And not very many people at the bottom, not many people at the top, but most of the people are in the middle section, the middle 2/3. That's the average human. 85 to 115 is the bulk of the population. Now, they're not the ones that set patterns generally. They're the ones that follow patterns that are set by others because you need processing speed and memory to be able to think in real time. And most people find that challenging. So the people at the very bottom are trained. Not much cognition going on there at all. The people at the top, they're the ones that are defining and setting and refining the patterns, and others follow along. Now, some of it is descriptive, like people just share their patterns with others. Hey, try this idea, you might like it. And others are prescriptive. Do this or else. And as a teacher, I got to swim in those waters every day. Now, the problem with prescriptive is that you have to control everything. Now, I'm pretty lazy myself, and I'm far more interested in management than control. Because if you have to control things, oh God, this thing's too steep. This is just early days on my channel, so excuse me for... There, my computer was sliding around. I get distracted easily, so I hope this isn't too distracting what's behind you. I've got a lot of busy things for people to keep their attention on. None of it's moving, of course, except for me, perhaps. And you got to fill your mind up or it wanders. Okay, so we're back to paradigms and thinking inside the box and thinking outside the box, and you have routines and patterns that you follow. Some people set them, some people follow them. Now, those are generalizations, of course. There's people at the top that never set patterns because a lot of people have what I would call a fear lobotomy. They're too afraid to do independent thinking because they're concerned about how they will be judged by others. And that was me for a lot of my life, at least when I was around other people. When I was by myself, I was very creative and innovative, but around other people, I didn't really understand why they behaved the way they did. And so I kind of just nice planet. Don't like what you've done with it. Don't understand how you're doing things. So I'm just going to keep a low profile and joke around, because then I don't have to worry about people judging me too much. They'll just say, he's not very relevant because he's just joking around. As a result of that, I became very quick-witted and you want to play? Let's have a fun time and challenge me. Anyway, that's what I did as an educator. I was challenging people's thinking and trying to get some cognition happening, because, it's only lonely if you have nobody to play with. So, how do you find who to play with? Well, play with everyone. Some people will accept it, others will reject it, some will play along. Anyway, it's a really good way of judging other people's level of fear and or intelligence, because humor requires thinking about multiple things, either in rapid succession or simultaneously. You have to be able to understand two different concepts for humor to even work. And the best humor is the unexpected coming up, and then you look at it and it points out something going on in society that doesn't really make much sense. And so people laugh and they go, wow, that was funny. And the really funny thing about it is the comedian is planting paradigms in your brain that are different than the ones you're used to. In fact, people seek out paradigm shifters called comedians for that particular reason unconsciously. The more controlled and contrived your society is, the more narrow the range of acceptable topics for humor. I think in politics they call it the Overton window. There's a range of things that you can talk about. And the more fear the society has, the more conformity, which are pretty much the same thing. Or they can devolve into the same thing. The narrower the window, the more open the society, the more relaxed and free-thinking the society, the wider the Overton window is. Now, both of them have their challenges and their strengths. Now, if you have a really wide window, where anything goes, then you end up with a wide range of behaviors that go along with it. So there's always got to be a balance between conformity and freedom. You can't have total freedom without problems that go with it, because every society has a contract, unconscious or conscious, like our laws are part of it. Our social contract is another one. You can't do that. That's not okay. Those are violating the contracts of our society. If you look at what's going on in our world currently, we have a huge influx of people from other parts of the world that do not think like we do. And as far as we're concerned, they are breaking our social contract. Now, their social contract that they have within their group is very different than the one we have. And that's where all this conflict's coming from. And people are confused because, why is this happening? Who let this come? What is the purpose of it? Where is it going? And these are valid questions. And we should be asking our politicians who are making the laws why they're allowing this, or actually encouraging it. That's another topic for discussion another time. So, getting back to paradigms, I haven't even gone through the first page. So I've been revisiting a lot of the paradigms that I've operated under my whole life, as have we all, and I've been questioning them. The one thing that came out of this last thing about climate change and COVID is there's a lot of things that they're saying that are, once you start scratching under the surface, they make no sense at all. And so I've challenged a lot of these paradigms personally. Like, we've been taught to believe that germs are bad and every germ has a disease it causes. Is that true? Everybody thinks it is. It's been accepted as knowledge that's common to humanity in the Western world. Not every society thinks that way, however. If you look at the Chinese, they have a very different paradigm that uses qi or energy as part of their healing paradigm. And India also has that. They have two very old cultures. The Ayurvedic medicine school in India has ancient roots, and it is as effective, sometimes if not more so, than Western allopathic medicine, and the same with the Chinese medicine. Now, the Indians also came up with yoga, which is a physical meditation for health, flexibility, and the paradigm embodied, actually there's a bunch of paradigms embodied in it, and you can look at them and compare them to the ones in your own culture and start assessing things differently. Because one thing this 1960s did was it shook up the paradigm, just like COVID did in the 21st century here in the early years. So, germ theory. How to be healthy. Kill the bugs. Kill them. Poison them. Get them. Well, I've been on a journey for my whole adult life, seeking out health and healing in various lines, just personally myself. And part of my education journey was mentally healing people through finding ways of making your way in the world in a society that has certain expectations. Well, I've been taught my whole life that brushing your teeth with toothpaste and going to see the dentist is how you deal with oral health. Well, what is our whole medical system based on? Because dental health is part of the medical system because it uses the same allopathic treatments that the medical doctors use as well. Well, Hippocrates was the so-called father of modern medicine. And one of the quotes he had, I know he said it in Greek and it was translated into Old English and said, "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food." Another corollary to that is you dig your grave with your teeth. Now, everything you put in your mouth and swallow, or even put in your mouth because you absorb things there, is either going to help heal you, or it's going to be harmful, or it's going to be neutral. Well, part of the deep dive I've done on that was I've been involved in agriculture on and off through my family for most of my life as well. And so I took a course on soil biology from a woman named Elaine Ingham, who discovered that plants and fungi and bacteria have a symbiotic relationship. In fact, why do forests not need to be fertilized? Interesting concept. I don't see anybody fertilizing the forest. The forest fertilizes itself in a bunch of different ways. I live in the rainforest in the west coast of British Columbia, and the salmon is a big part of the rainforest ecology. They're both valid concepts because there is a culture on and under the forest floor that dynamically interacts with the forest. The bears and eagles take salmon from the river and they spread them around on the forest floor, which feeds the soil beneath the trees. Now, the trees end up with abundant growth, which creates an ecosystem in and of itself. Now, I've also studied ecology at school some because I was interested in all kinds of different things. Now, if you look at the succession of plants, what you end up with is a bare dirt, disturbed soil, and then you end up with a bunch of primary succession plants that are basically don't have much in the way of roots, and the root system they do have is able to deal with a fairly basic or high pH environment where bacteria tend to dominate. Bacteria tend to make the soil more alkaline, and fungus make the soil more acid because they use acids to dissolve rocks to feed themselves, and curiously enough, to feed the plants. There's a dynamic in the soil that operates whereby the plants exude certain sugars into the soil, and it feeds fungus and bacteria in the soil. Now the fungus take whatever chemical signals they get from the plant and says, oh, plant wants some boron. So it goes and mines some boron with its acids and moves them through their mycelium or rootlet structure and feeds the plant these minerals, and the plant rewards it by feeding it sugars, which that's what plants make. And they use sunshine and CO2 to make sugars. But they also need minerals, and that's what the fungus gives them. So there's a dynamic in the soil between the plants, the bacteria, and the fungi, and the animals living in the soil that keeps the whole ecosystem functioning and healthy. Well, if you look at a human being, what are we? We're a big party of about 1.5 trillion cells. A lot of them are very specialized, that work together to create what we call a human being. We are outnumbered 10 to 1 by bacteria, fungus, and other creatures that live on and in us, and we would die without them. Did you understand that your digestive system is a huge part of your immune system? So whenever we take antibiotics, they're broad spectrum, so they kill everything, or a lot of things. And if we don't repopulate them with healthy bacteria that we need to survive, then people end up with health issues, immunity issues. And one of the things I learned in soil biology is if you kill everything off, then the first thing that comes back are low oxygen organisms called facultative bacteria, and they're the nasty ones that cause diseases. So the same thing holds true in your body. If you kill everything off, what's going to happen? You're going to get repopulated by nasty things until your system rebalances itself. That's why people take probiotics. That's why I eat raw sauerkraut every day, just to keep my immune system functioning. Anyway, the reason I brought this up is oral health is about a system. You have an environment in your mouth that is not sterile. Your mouth is filled with bacteria. People go, oh, scary, I got bacteria in my mouth. Too. Actually, that's a very allopathic way of looking at it. Kills the bugs. And it's not very helpful for your long-term survival, frankly. To keep your mouth healthy, you have something called Lactobacillus salivarius, which is a bacteria that feeds off of milk sugars. Now, what that does is it tends to lower the pH of the environment it lives in to somewhere around 5.5. 7 is neutral, balanced. And so the kind of bacteria that rot your teeth live in a higher pH environment. So you can nuke your mouth using mouthwash and kill everything in it, but it doesn't. right? Have you heard of resistant bacteria? Well, they're the bacteria that survive the onslaught, and now they are resistant to whatever you're using to kill it. That's not a very good long-term strategy. It's more like a very short-term do or die kind of thing. If you got a bacterial explosion, you got to deal with it. Well, let's go back to bacteria theory versus terrain theory. Okay, what's the terrain? Your mouth. What's the problem? Tooth bacteria. They eat your teeth. They live in the plaque that lives on. Plaque is a organic substance that's a dynamic between bacteria and whatever food that you're eating that gets deposited on your teeth. Now, that raises the pH of your mouth. So by brushing my teeth with powder that has bacteria that lower the pH of the mouth, it basically creates an environment where those tooth bacteria can't thrive. It doesn't kill them all. You want a dynamic balance. You don't want to have an unbalanced system. All bacteria has a useful function, and they all have certain conditions under which they thrive. So if you create the conditions under which the bacteria can't thrive, then you've kept them in check. You're never going to be able to get them all, because every time you eat, you're reinfecting your mouth with different bacteria, because it's on everything and you can't wash it all off. And bacteria, given an environment, nice warm mouth, lots of moisture, and lots of food, guess what's going to happen? Unless you have an environment created by the bacteria that's resident in your mouth that keeps everything in check. I don't even spit it out. I swallow it because I want those bacteria reinfecting my whole system so I can keep the balance in my digestive system, which keeps the balance in my immune system. I generally don't get sick. And I have not had any pokes of any kind since 1985. I think that was a tetanus shot. And the research that I've been doing, even that's questionable. Hardly anybody ever gets tetanus. Ever wonder why? It ain't because of the shots. It's because there's hardly any around. And the environment has to be right. Now, if you are malnourished and you're drinking water that's contaminated, and you're eating food that comes from an environment that has lots of facultative organism like fecal coliform and stuff like that in it, your immune system is going to be constantly under assault. It's funny, I was listening to George Carlin, and he was talking about when he was younger, right? They used to, sorry, I got to adjust this mic. It's starting to slip. He was talking about polio, and he was saying, my friends and I, we swam in the Hudson River when we were kids, and there were floating turds around us, and none of us got polio because our immune systems were bulletproof. Well, if you think about it, looking at terrain theory, he probably wasn't far off the truth. If you keep the environment well, everything stays safe because there's balance. Oh, here's a joke for you. All you Americans think us Canadians are all polite. We know you're all armed and we're not stupid. Well, if you have a society where the only people that have weapons are the police, which are few and far between, the military, which are on bases, and the criminals, then what do you think's going to happen? You look at Canada. Actually, look at the United States. Some cities you are banned from carrying a handgun. Other states, you can have open or concealed carry, and it's encouraged. Which one do you think has more crime? Yeah, it's the ones where you're not allowed to carry guns. I mean, having a society that's armed to the teeth is probably not the best solution either. You need to find a balance. The United States has found their balance and Canadians had a balance that's gone. The crime rate is skyrocketed because if you commit a crime in our country, we have a catch and release policy. But heaven forbid you go against the politics of the government, man. They'll put you in jail for months without before you even get to go to trial. Just look what happened from the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. Yeah, and there's still people getting punished for that. For mischief. People are getting let out with murder charges and fentanyl drug charges. And we punish grandmas for taking selfies in front of the police. I mean, what kind of an insane asylum is this we're living in? Anyway, that's bringing politics into it. I haven't even gone through the first page. This is going to take a while. Okay, so there's a symbiotic relationship between life at different stages on the micro to the macro and on every stage in between. I think we're going to leave it there for today, and next time, let's go to page 2. I think we'll talk more about programs and strategies in the next session. So for now, have fun, because if you're having fun, people are going to wonder what you got doing right, and maybe they'll want some too.